All right, welcome back. Hi, and welcome to C Programming Skills using Replit.com. I'm Norman McIntyre. Let's get started. So our focus on this lesson is going to be C structure skills. You'll find out that the skills you learn in this lesson related to C structure you'll use in pretty much every program you write. So with that said, let's get started. So as always, go ahead and create a new project. You can call your project the C Programming Skills using Replit-Structure Skills. That's what I called mine. So I've already created the project, and of course right now all it does is says the C structure skills when I click on run. So this will be your starting place. Now previously in the course, let's say you were writing a program to track students and you had, let's say you're working with several students and you want to keep their name, their ID, and maybe their GPA, their grade point average. So what you might say is you could have a character name, well, let's say 32, and you could have a ID, a integer that's going to be an ID, like 1, 2, 3, 4, and maybe you have a double that's go be their grade point average, and you would do that for student 1 and student 2 and student 3. Well, you'd have to have a name for student 1 and an ID for student 1 and GPA for student 1. Then you'd have to keep repeating this, and when you think about it, all these go together. That is, you want to treat them as one unit because they're going to represent a student. We know the C language defines a data type called char. We know the C language has a data type called int. We know the C language has a data type called double. But suppose you could create your own data types and make them to be combinations of these values. In other words, suppose we could do this. Type def. Now type def says you're going to define a new data type. You give it in this case we're going to call it a structure. So struct, which is an abbreviation for structure, it begins and it ends. And here we give it a name. Let's call this the student underscore T. The convention underscore T is for type. So you could think of this as saying student type. In other words, student data type. So we've actually created a structure that will contain whatever student type is. Now remember, you should be following along and entering this code as well as you're watching. But now we could say, for example, let's have a character name, let's say max name length, and we'll say, well, let's have a pound define, and we'll say max name length. Maybe let's make it 32. And we could say we're going to have an integer ID, and we're going to have a double, maybe GPA. The key observation you should be making is you have defined a new data type called, in this case, student underscore T, and it contains these items. Now the reason this is so cool and used so widely is, as you can imagine, most of the problems, the programs you write, are going to contain multiple items that you can refer to as one. In fact, some people like to refer to this as a record. It's like a folder, it's like an entry, and it contains multiple things. So we could say, just like we used to say, or we can still say, let's say integer count. Right, we've said we're going to have an integer variable called count. Well, now we can have a variable called student underscore t. And this student underscore t is a data type, just like int is a data type. Student underscore t is a data type. So we could have a student called John. And maybe we could, just like we could have an integer count, and we could have an integer, let's say, number. Well, in the same way, we could have a student type John, we could have a student type Sally. There, notice the similarity here. This is defined by the C language. Here, this is defined by you, the developer, based on type definition. You're saying, I'm defining a new type, and the type is a structure. Structure takes multiple items here. So what this means, we could now say, oh, well, let's now for John dot, and check that out. It knows that John dot has three different things it could be. John could have an ID, for example. Let's say equals 1, 2, 3. And maybe John dot is going to have a GPA. And the GPA, let's say, is 95.5. And John can have a name. Now remember, the name, it says character 12 here. Well, the name is an array. It's going to be more than one character. And we know that in the C language, from our previous lesson on strings, we need to copy the contents of the string into name. So for this one, we can say string copy into John dot name. What do we want to copy into there? Let's say John Doe. Now we see we're getting the underscore, meaning we've got an implicit define. And probably by now you know you need to include string.h. So notice we've defined John, and it has entries. It has a john.id, a john.gpa, and a john.name. In the same way, we could say, okay, Sally dot ID equals 456. Sally dot GPA equals, let's say, 98.5. And let's do a string copy into Sally dot name. And we'll say Sally Smith. So this is your first lesson, your first step on learning about structures. Very important demonstration. You've given a type def of a structure that you're going to call student underscore t. You can put whatever entries inside of here you need. So in this case, we're saying we're going to have a name, an ID, a GPA. Then you see you can declare variables of that new data type. And you see you access entries by using this dot notation. Now, right now, if I come down here, let's do it maybe right here. We could say printf, let's say john.id is %d \n. And we could say john.id. We could say printf john.gpa is %f \n. So john.gpa. And maybe we'll put here at the front, we'll say printf John.name is a string, \n, and so we'll say John.name. And if we click on run, check this out. John.name is John Doe. John.id is 123. John.gpa 95.9. So very important demonstration. Make sure your code is doing like I have the code here. And this is probably enough for this video. In the next video, we'll look at some more skills related to using structures. I'm Norman McIntyre. Thanks as always for watching.